The Trump administration is yet to spell out its plans. For now, all we have is the Truth Social post plus the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who's dropped a hint. That's Scott Bessent. He says America will ramp up pressure on not just Iran, but every country doing business with Iran.
You are either with us or against us. If you insist on doing business with Iran, either transferring money, buying their oil, or doing seaborne ship transfers, then the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. government will put its full might and force toward enforcing against you. It is time for our allies and the rest of the world to make a decision.
You're with us or against us. If this sounds familiar, it is. Long before Scott Bessent, a certain George Bush used these words in his famous speech after the 9/11 attacks. Bush was president then. He wanted American allies to join his infamous war on terror, so he issued them an ultimatum. You're either with us or against us. And then he attacked Iraq. Now the target is Iran, and Trump and company are using the same tactics, even the same words.
大家好，这里是华人看世界 CN View 频道。今天的国际局势可谓暗流涌动。巴基斯坦前总理伊姆兰汗深夜被转往医院，却在几个小时后重新回到牢房。这场看似医疗安排的转移背后究竟隐藏着怎样的权力博弈？与此同时，孟加拉国可能加入由沙特、巴基斯坦和土耳其组成的防务框架，印度与达卡之间的关系又会走向何方？伊朗面对美国所谓的经济决战，中国会不会成为关键变量？俄日之间围绕争议岛屿的军事对峙也正在重新升温。除此之外，印度为何从食糖出口国变成进口国？马斯克的星链能否真正进入印度市场？特朗普身边那位神秘的人体打印机又拥有多大影响力？最后还有一项针对黑色素瘤的个性化疫苗，是否正在为癌症治疗打开新的大门？本期节目，我们将逐一拆解这些事件背后的真相与影响。
Now to the Iran war, where Donald Trump is threatening to drop bombs. He's calling them E-bombs because that's what he wants to do. He wants to fight an economic war, a full-scale campaign to financially isolate Iran, as if that hasn't been done already. But Trump is tom-tomming it as the ultimate weapon. Just shows that he has run out of options. The negotiations have stalled. The military campaign has failed to deliver, and now Trump is exploring economic warfare. He announced it yesterday on Truth Social. He called it the quote-unquote most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country. Full marks for hyperbole, but let's see what it entails. The Trump administration is yet to spell out its plans. For now, all we have is the Truth Social post plus the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who's dropped a hint. That's Scott Bessent. He says America will ramp up pressure on not just Iran, but every country doing business with Iran.
You are either with us or against us. If you insist on doing business with Iran, either transferring money, buying their oil, or doing seaborne ship transfers, then the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. government will put its full might and force toward enforcing against you. It is time for our allies and the rest of the world to make a decision.
You're with us or against us. If this sounds familiar, it is. Long before Scott Bessent, a certain George Bush used these words in his famous speech after the 9/11 attacks. Bush was president then. He wanted American allies to join his infamous war on terror, so he issued them an ultimatum. You're either with us or against us. And then he attacked Iraq. Now the target is Iran, and Trump and company are using the same tactics, even the same words. They want to force their allies to join ranks. It's not clear how they'll do it when they keep dumping and berating the same allies. Meanwhile, Gulf powers are reassessing their options. The UAE, for instance, has suspended all trade with Iran. Earlier this week, 2 ballistic missiles were fired at the UAE. Iran says it did not launch these missiles and that it was a false flag operation, but the UAE has just gone ahead and suspended all commercial ties. This will hurt Tehran. The UAE is a key trading partner for them. Before the war began, it was the largest source of Iran's imports. In 2024, more than 30% of Iran's imports came from the Emirates. So this is a setback. If more countries follow suit, it would bleed Iran's already battered economy. Tehran has called Trump's plan unlawful. Their foreign minister is Abbas Araghchi. He called America's threats a distraction. Let me quote from his statement. This is what he said. The so-called economic D-Day is a diversion from America's own crisis, unprecedented debt, and surging interest costs. China, too, has spoken about this. They've issued a warning to Washington.
Sanctions and pressure will not help resolve the issue. China calls on all relevant parties to take responsible measures and resolve the problem through political and diplomatic means. China opposes illegal unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law and are not authorized by the UN Security Council, and calls on all relevant parties to take responsible measures and resolve the issue through political and diplomatic channels.
Not surprising that Beijing is not on board, and without Beijing on board, Trump's plan will not work. China is Iran's largest trading partner. Their bilateral trade is worth $10 billion, and this is minus the oil purchases. $10 billion minus the oil. Oil is the biggest commodity that China buys from Iran. It buys 90% of Iran's oil. And this is despite the existing sanctions on Iran. The current sanctions block Iran from selling oil in the international market, but China has bypassed them. It keeps buying the oil. So there's nothing to suggest why new sanctions will work. Also, Iran has been living with sanctions for decades. It's their default setting now. It began with the founding of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Over the next 5 odd decades, the US tried every trick in the book to isolate them. And in the last few months, Trump has tried everything from airstrikes to naval blockades. The US has wiped out Iran's top leadership, but the regime has not surrendered. They have, in fact, gained leverage by controlling the Strait of Hormuz. So Trump is basically being confronted with the limits of American power. He cannot keep fighting, and he cannot walk away empty-handed. So he's repackaging old tactics as the E-bomb. But a prolonged conflict is bad news for the rest of the world. Shipping remains disrupted, commercial vessels are under attack, and pirates are fishing in troubled waters. Today, they've taken Indian sailors hostage. Let's go to our map room to understand what's happening here. Pirates have hijacked 2 commercial vessels in 2 separate incidents, one off Yemen and the other off Somalia. The first ship is the MT Cebu-1. It's an Eritrea-flagged tanker. It was carrying oil products. It had 20 crew members, 16 of whom were Indian. This ship was seized in the Gulf of Aden. The second is a Cameroon-flagged cargo ship. It was taken off Somalia's Puntland coast on the 17th of August. There are 10 crew members on board. 6 of them are Indian. Reports say they're all safe, but they're yet to be released. As of last month, 67 commercial vessels have been targeted in this region, and at least 17 seafarers have been killed. The fear is it will only get worse as we stare at the prospect of an escalation. The year was 2016. Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Japan. He was meeting then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and soon both got talking about a problem, a decades-old problem between the 2 countries, the disputed Kuril Islands. These are 4 tiny islands. Both Russia and Japan claim them. 10 years back, Putin and Abe discussed these islands, and their discussion was not tense. It was, in fact, quite friendly. The leaders discussed joint economic projects for these islands, projects like fishing and tourism. Putin even talked about a peace treaty. Now, fast forward 10 years, and things are not so rosy. Last week, Putin made his first visit to the disputed islands. He's been president for more than a quarter of a century, but this is the first time he went to the Kuril Islands. He went to Iturup. It's the largest of the 4 islands claimed by Japan. And Tokyo was not thrilled about Putin's visit. They slammed it. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi called it, and I'm quoting, absolutely unacceptable. Russia, unsurprisingly, disagreed. Then Japan summoned Russia's ambassador, and Russia responded by summoning Japan's.
As for our ambassadors, yes, the Russian ambassador was summoned to the Japanese Foreign Ministry, where this protest was lodged against him. When we learned how Ms. Takaichi and her foreign minister had characterized our president's visit to his own territory and his own citizens, we immediately summoned the Japanese ambassador.
As diplomatic tensions rose, there came a military response from Russia. Their Pacific Fleet has been holding drills, large-scale drills around the tiny islands with 60 ships and submarines, 30 aircraft, helicopters and drones, and more than 13,000 troops. And on Thursday, they upped the ante. The Russians conducted live-fire missile drills. They fired missiles from a nuclear submarine, a guided missile cruiser, and their Bastion defense system. These missiles hit targets about 300 kilometers away. Needless to say, Japan was alarmed. Their foreign minister said, and I'm quoting, "Tokyo cannot tolerate this military buildup, especially on territory that it considers Japanese." But why are these islands disputed? Why are they claimed by both Russia and Japan? Kuril is a chain of some 56 volcanic islands. They stretch for around 15,600 kilometers between Japan's Hokkaido and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. But the actual dispute is over just 4 islands: Iturup, Kunashir, Shikotan, and the Habomai Islets. Japan calls them the Northern Territories. Russia considers them part of the Kuril Islands. And this is where the history gets messy. Let's look at the backstory here. In 1855, Russia and Japan signed a treaty dividing the territory. The 4 southern islands went to Japan. Then in 1875, Japan gave up its claim to Sakhalin. This was in exchange for the entire Kuril chain. But then came the Second World War. In the final days of the war, the Soviet Union seized the Kuril Islands, including the 4 islands now claimed by Japan. Japanese residents were expelled from these islands. The Soviet Union took control. That is where the modern dispute begins, post the Second World War. In 1951, there was the San Francisco Peace Treaty. Japan renounced its claim to the Kuril Islands, but the Soviet Union did not sign the treaty. And Japan's argument is this. It says the 4 islands, the 4 disputed islands, were never part of the treaty. In other words, Japan says it did not renounce these 4 islands. But Russia disagrees, hence the dispute. A dispute that has lasted 150 years and counting. So why do these islands matter so much? For multiple reasons. The first is the fish. The waters around these islands are rich in marine resources. They also potentially have mineral resources, but the bigger prize is geography. These islands sit between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Pacific Ocean. For Russia, that makes them a strategic military barrier. The islands also give Russia access to the Pacific, especially through straits that don't freeze in winter. So these are not just 4 rocks that someone forgot to resolve on a map. These islands are geopolitical assets, and that is why the 2016 moment feels so distant now. Back then, there was talk of peace. But right now, with the Ukraine war and Japan's support to the Western Bloc, it is back to saber rattling and drills. The 4 islands have not changed, but the relationship between Japan and Russia has. Putin is flexing military muscle and Takaichi is pushing back.
今天这期节目，我们从巴基斯坦深夜转移伊姆兰汗的事件出发，看到的并不只是一次医院与监狱之间的往返，更是一场围绕权力、司法与民意展开的较量。最高法院要求将伊姆兰汗送往指定的私立医院，并留院观察，但当局却在夜色掩护下，将他送往政府能够完全掌控的公立医院，短短几个小时后又把他送回牢房。表面上这是一次医疗安排，实际上它暴露出司法命令能否真正约束权力，也暴露出军方与文官体系之间长期存在的失衡。伊姆兰汗之所以成为军方最忌惮的对手，并不只是因为他曾经担任总理，更因为他至今仍拥有强大的个人号召力。按照巴基斯坦过去的政治惯例，被罢黜的总理往往会选择流亡、妥协或者逐渐退出公众视野。但伊姆兰汗拒绝按照这套剧本行动，他宁愿留在监狱，也不愿轻易与军方达成交易。对阿西姆·穆尼尔来说，释放这样一位仍然能够动员民众的政治人物，无论他做出什么承诺，都意味着重新打开一个无法控制的变量。所以伊姆兰汗面对的并不仅仅是个人牢狱之灾，而是一个国家政治规则的缩影。当法院的命令可以被重新解释，当医院也可以被区分为能够控制的医院和不能控制的医院，当一场转移必须在深夜完成，公众自然会追问，真正拥有最终决定权的到底是法律还是掌握枪杆子的人？而一个拥有核武器、政治高度动荡的国家，如果长期依靠这种方式处理分歧，最终付出的代价不会只由某一个政治人物承担。孟加拉国的局势则呈现出另一种复杂变化。达卡是否访问新德里？是否参加多边峰会？是否考虑加入由沙特、巴基斯坦和土耳其推动的防务框架？表面上看是外交行程， 实际上反映的是孟加拉国正在加快外交多元化。这个拥有庞大人口、重要海岸线和持续增长潜力的国家，必然会成为美国、中国、欧洲以及西亚力量争取的对象。对孟加拉国来说，多方下注可以增加战略空间，但对印度来说，巴基斯坦、土耳其以及西亚军事力量如果进一步进入南亚，势必会增加周边安全压力。这里最值得注意的是历史记忆与现实利益之间的冲突。孟加拉国曾经经历过惨痛的战争，也曾与印度保持密切合作，但新一代政治力量正在重新评估自己的身份和利益。外交关系从来不是永远固定的情感联盟，而是由安全、贸易、能源、移民和国内政治共同推动的选择。印度如果希望稳定与孟加拉国的关系，就不能只依赖过去的友好记忆，也必须认真回应对方不断变化的现实需求。伊朗问题同样说明，经济制裁并不是一把可以无限使用的万能钥匙。美国试图通过所谓经济决战，迫使所有与伊朗交易的国家选边站队，但伊朗已经在长期制裁中形成了自己的生存方式。中国仍是伊朗最重要的贸易伙伴之一，海湾国家也必须在安全风险与经济利益之间反复权衡。制裁可以制造压力，却未必能够制造屈服。而当军事手段无法达到目标时，再把旧有制裁包装成更具震慑性的名称，也无法改变问题的本质。真正令人担忧的是冲突不断外溢，航运受阻，商船遇袭，海盗趁势扩大活动范围，都会把地区战争的成本转嫁给普通船员、企业和消费者。与此同时，俄日围绕争议岛屿的紧张关系也从外交争论升级为军演和导弹试射。那些岛屿面积或许不大，但它们连接着海上通道、渔业资源和军事战略空间。历史争议之所以难以解决，正是因为它从来不只是地图上的几块土地，而是牵涉国家安全、民族情绪和大国竞争。再回到印度国内，食糖进口和液磷燃料政策提醒我们，任何政策都可能产生连锁反应。为了降低能源进口风险，印度提高乙醇掺混比例，本意是增强能源安全。但乙醇原料部分来自甘蔗，甘蔗更多的被用于燃料，就意味着制糖资源减少，再叠加降雨不足，食糖库存和价格自然承压。这个案例说明，能源政策、农业政策和民生价格并不是彼此孤立的。政策目标可以宏大，但执行时必须充分考虑产业链上的每一个环节，更不能用轻描淡写的说法掩盖真实压力。埃隆·马斯克想把星链、特斯拉和 X 进一步带入印度，也面对同样的现实考验。技术先进并不代表监管可以让步。星链能够改善偏远地区的网络覆盖，但如果一个国家的重要通信基础设施掌握在私人企业和个人手中，服务是否稳定，数据是否安全，战争或危机时是否会被切断，都是必须回答的问题。印度的谨慎并非拒绝创新，而是在追问创新背后的控制权究竟属于谁。美国白宫围绕纳塔利·哈普的争议，则让我们看到另一种权力逻辑。真正重要的未必是他的正式职务，而是他能否接近总统，向总统递交什么信息，以及他是否绕过了正常的行政链条。现代政治中，权力不仅存在于公开的职位和制度之中，也存在于谁能够控制信息入口。一个资历尚浅的人，如果长期占据最高决策者身边的位置，就必然会引发公众对透明度、问责和决策质量的追问。最后，癌症疫苗的消息给今天充满冲突的世界带来了一点理性的希望。莫德纳与默克合作研发的个性化 mRNA 疫苗，目前显示出降低高危黑色素瘤复发和扩散风险的潜力，但它还不是能够预防所有癌症的万能疫苗，也远未意味着人类已经彻底攻克癌症。科学进步最值得尊重的地方，恰恰在于它不会把阶段性成果夸大成终极答案，它会告诉我们已经走了多远，也会诚实地说明前方还有多少未知。把今天所有新闻放在一起，我们会发现世界正在进入一个更加分散、更加竞争，也更加难以预测的阶段。政治人物在争夺权力，国家在重新排列阵营，企业家在争夺基础设施，科学家则在与疾病争分夺秒。面对这些变化，我们既不能只看热闹，也不能被情绪牵着走。更重要的是追问事实背后的结构，理解每一个决定会影响谁，又会把怎样的风险留给未来。关于伊姆兰汗的命运、孟加拉国的外交选择、伊朗制裁能否奏效，以及印度如何平衡能源安全与民生价格，欢迎在评论区留下你的判断。 感谢收看本期节目，欢迎点赞订阅，获取更多国际时事与深度解读。